Welcome to The Deep Dive. We're the podcast where we really get stuck into fascinating material, pull out the key nuggets, and help you get properly informed.
That's the plan.
And today, wow, we are taking on a really expansive journey. We've got a stack of sources here that honestly challenge our fundamental grasp on reality itself.
Yeah, it's pretty mind-bending stuff. We're touching on everything from, the ancient free will debate right up to cutting-edge maths and deep spiritual ideas.
Exactly. So our mission really is to unpack all these ideas that seem totally separate. And show how they might actually maybe converge into one single understanding, like a shift in perspective that could change how you see everything.
Right, and this isn't just about listing facts. It's more about revealing the kind of underlying structures of reality, of consciousness.
Okay, so let's get into it. As we dig deeper, I think you'll find some genuinely surprising connections pop up. This deep dive is really tailored to guide you through some, well, pretty profound insights.
Sounds good. Where do we start?
Let's start with something that's puzzled thinkers for literally millennia: free will.
Ah, the classic.
Yeah. So at its core, it's about whether we genuinely make our own choices, right? Like, can we really select between different options? Do we have actual control?
And it's so important because it's the bedrock for why we praise or blame people. The whole idea of moral responsibility hinges on it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You can only really be held responsible for something you freely chose to do.
Right. And when philosophers talk about free will, they usually focus on maybe three key things.
Okay.
First, there's the freedom to do otherwise.
Yeah.
In that exact situation, could you genuinely have picked something else?
The counterfactual choice.
Exactly. Second is sourcehood. Are you the real starting point, the true originator of your action? Or is it just like the end of a long chain reaction of causes stretching back way before you?
That's a big one.
And third, tying back to what you said, is moral responsibility. If you are the source, then you own your actions, good or bad. You're accountable.
So naturally, this leads to some pretty intense philosophical clashes. The huge one is determinism versus free will.
Always.
Determinism basically says every single event, even our choices, is completely determined by prior causes.
Right. Like cosmic dominoes.
Yeah. So if that's true,
Yeah.
how can we possibly be the true authors of our actions? It feels like we're just, puppets playing out a pre-written script.
And that's the big split. You get the incompatibilists. They say, look, a free will and determinism that just flat out cannot coexist. It's one or the other.
Okay, so within that camp.
Within that, you've got libertarians. They say, nope, determinism is false. We humans do have genuine free will. We are the causa sui, the cause of ourselves, the true originators.
The buck stops here, basically.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
Then you have hard determinists. They say, okay, determinism is true, and because of that, free will and moral responsibility. They're illusions. Useful, perhaps, but illusions nonetheless.
Wow, okay. That's quite a stance.
And then there's even hard incompatibilism, which says, you know what? Free will is impossible whether the universe is deterministic or indeterministic, like random quantum stuff doesn't help either.
Oh, so no escape either way for them.
Pretty much.
But then you have the compatibilists, sometimes called soft determinists, right? They try to sort of have their cake and eat it too.
Well, they try to bridge the gap, yeah. They argue that free will can actually coexist with determinism.
Okay, hold on. How does that work? If my choice is already determined by past events, how is it free? Does that really satisfy our gut feeling that we could have done otherwise?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And that's where the definitions get subtle. Classical compatibilism said freedom is just, like, the absence of external constraints. If nobody's holding a gun to your head, you're free, even if your desire was determined.
Okay. Bit minimalist.
A bit. Newer compatibilists focus more on psychological stuff. Are you acting according to your reasons, your values? Even if those reasons themselves have deterministic roots. As long as you're not coerced or acting out of psychosis, maybe that's free enough.
So they're redefining freedom in a way to fit with determinism.
You could say that. They often see the whole incompatibilist debate as like a false dilemma based on a misunderstanding of what freedom really means in practice.
Interesting. And our sources mention a couple of specific models to pin this down, like the hierarchical model.
Right. That one distinguishes between first-order desires just wanting to do something, like eat cake, and second-order desires wanting to want something, like wanting to be the kind of person who resists cake. Acting freely means acting on desires you endorse at that higher level.
Okay, so it's about aligning your actions with your reflective values.
Sort of, yeah. And then there's the reasons responsive model. Free will here means being responsive to rational reasons. You're free if you would have acted differently if there had been good reasons to do so, even if, in the actual determined sequence, you didn't.
So it's about the capacity to respond to reason, not necessarily having done otherwise in that specific instance.
Exactly. It's subtle.
And historically, this isn't new, is it? You mentioned the Greeks.
Oh, absolutely not. Aristotle, Epictetus, they had ideas that lean compatibilist. Alexander of Aphrodisias, though, he was more of an incompatibilist. Later on, you get Kant, who thought free will was absolutely essential for human dignity.
Right.
While someone like Laplace, the physicist, was a huge champion of determinism based on classical mechanics. This debate has echoed for centuries.
So, bringing it back to the listener, why is this ancient philosophical wrangling matter to you?
Well, it's not just abstract.
No. It's fundamental to our ethics, our laws, even how we see ourselves, our personal identity. Think about it if we truly lack free will. Concepts like praise, blame, reward, punishment.
They crumble.
They basically lose their entire foundation. It forces you to completely rethink what accountability even means.
Absolutely. It's huge.
Okay, so that sets the stage.
Right.
But now, one of the most intriguing points our sources make is that this whole centuries-long free will debate might just be a farce.
Yeah, that's a provocative word for it. Not just an endless argument, but maybe an intentionally unresolvable one.
Like a philosophical stalemate,
Yeah.
just going round and round the same points, never getting a knockout punch.
Exactly. And the sources suggest this complexity, this unresolvability, might actually serve a purpose. It keeps us questioning, keeps us reflecting, keeps us writing papers and books.
Fuels the philosophy industry.
Hey, you could say that. It fuels culture, in a way, by keeping this dialogue alive.
So it's like the pen is mightiest, in a weird way. The real powers isn't resolving it, but the act of writing, discussing, shaping thought about it.
Precisely. The thinkers, the writers, they wield influence by keeping this conversation going. They shape our beliefs, our legal systems, our societies. The debate itself generates meaning, inspires art, helps us grapple with these deep anxieties about control and responsibility.
Which leads to an even more radical step in the argument. The idea that what we call reality itself is fundamentally a conditioned belief.
Right. That our perceptions, our arguments, even our very sense of self, it's all shaped by layers and layers of conditioning. Cultural, psychological, linguistic, you name it.
This sounds a bit like constructivism
Mm-hmm.
or phenomenology, maybe even Eastern ideas like Maya.
It resonates strongly with all of those, yeah. Constructivism saying we build reality in our minds, phenomenology focusing on how experience is filtered through consciousness, and Eastern traditions like Buddhism often talking about the illusory nature of the perceived world.
So if reality is this conditioned belief system, then these big debates, like free will, they're not really genuine arguments trying to find objective truth.
The sources suggest they're more like byproducts, symptoms of these underlying conditioned beliefs.
And the evidence we use, the arguments we make, they get compartmentalized, either intentionally or just unconsciously.
Yeah, preventing any real resolution. It becomes a self-perpetuating discourse, a kind of intellectual wheel spinning that reflects a deeper ignorance of our own conditioning. We don't see the filters we're looking through.
Wow. And where does consciousness fit into this? Because you can't really talk about free will without assuming someone, some self, is doing the choosing.
Exactly. The free will debate is totally tangled up with the mystery of consciousness. Any talk of choice assumes an experiencer. But the nature of consciousness itself, that's just as debated, maybe even more poorly understood.
The hard problem of consciousness, right? Why does brain activity feel like anything from the inside?
That's the one. It really underlies the free will problem. If consciousness itself turns out to be some kind of conditioned delusion or an epiphenomenon, then where does that leave agency? It seems like free will would have to be illusory too.
Okay, so this connects to how we even study these things. Our sources talk about reductionism, breaking complex things down, which is useful, right?
Absolutely essential for analysis, like finding neural correlates for consciousness. You have to break it down to study the parts.
There's a catch.
There's a big catch. If that reductionism isn't followed by what the sources call rational integration, putting the pieces back together into a coherent whole, it just leads to fragmentation, siloed knowledge, what they dramatically call infinite irrationality.
We lose the big picture.
Totally. We lose sight of the totality, the interconnectedness. The goal should be holism, where real understanding comes from seeing how the parts fit and function within the larger system.
And this applies to language too, doesn't it? The idea that every word, every phrase is also a conditioned belief.
Yes. Take standard English. Phrases like, Think locally, act globally. It just assumes a globe exists as this self-evident thing.
Or solar system. It
Yeah.
assumes a sun at the center. These are frameworks we inherit.
Exactly. They're not neutral descriptions of raw reality. Language doesn't just describe the world. It actively creates the reality we experience by shaping what we pay attention to, what categories we use, what we take for granted. It's often the most invisible, powerful form of conditioning.
Which makes the question about consciousness even trickier. Like, physically, where is consciousness?
Right. We look in the brain, we find correlations, but we don't find the thing itself. No specific location has ever been found.
Because maybe it's the wrong kind of question.
That's what the sources suggest. Consciousness isn't an object within the world like a neuron or a rock. It's more like the field or the space in which all objects, all experiences appear. It's the precondition for experience. Asking where it is physically already presupposes a conditioned framework of space and objecthood that might not apply.
Okay, so building on that,
Yeah.
this idea of getting beyond conditioning, maybe towards an unconditioned reality.
Yeah.
Let's look through a Quranic lens, as our sources do. They introduce the concept of fitra.
Right. Fitra in Islamic thought. It's described as the innate primordial disposition, the natural state every human is created upon.
Like an original software.
Kind of, yeah. A state of pure receptivity, an inherent recognition of the divine before it gets overlaid or obscured by later conditioning. It's seen as unspoiled.
So it's like our unconditioned core. There's a quote here from the Quran, 30.3. So set your face firmly towards the religion as a pure monotheist fitra of Allah, upon which He has created all people. No change should there be in the creation of Allah. That sounds like a fundamental blueprint.
Exactly. It's seen as the essential human nature. But then after birth, we get shaped, right? Environment, traditions, culture, all these things act like veils, obscuring that original fitra.
There's that famous hadith, isn't there? Every child is born upon fitra, then his parents make him a Jew, a Christian, or a Magenian.
That's the one. It highlights how conditioning overlays that innate state. And this is why the Quran often refers to itself not as bringing totally new information, but as a reminder, Dikher.
A reminder.
Yeah, calling people back to what, in some deep sense, they already know within themselves, back to their fitra. Quran 88.21 says, "So remind, for you are only a reminder."
That's a really powerful idea. Truth isn't something totally alien we have to acquire, but something potentially forgotten that we need to remember.
Precisely.
Our sources also bring up another key concept here, amana. What's that about? It's mentioned in Quran 33.72 as a trust or responsibility given to humanity.
Yes, the amana. It ties in deeply with this idea of shaping reality. It's often interpreted as humanity's unique capacities for language, for reason, for moral discernment. These are seen as a trust from the divine.
And the pen, mentioned in Quran 96, that symbolizes this power.
Exactly. The ability to record, transmit, create knowledge, shape collective reality through symbols and language. It's presented as a divine gift, but also a heavy responsibility. How do we use this power?
Which means the way reality gets shaped through language. It isn't always just accidental drift. It can be deliberate.
Absolutely. The sources emphasize this. The Quran specifically warns against those who write the book with their own hands, then say, this is from Allah. That's Quran 2.79. It's a direct warning about manipulating language and text for power or deception.
So there's an awareness of intentional conditioning, intentional misuse of this pen power.
Definitely. The Quran distinguishes wrongdoers, the zaliman, as those who knowingly twist language or conceal truth to maintain injustice, confuse people, or reinforce harmful conditioning. Quran 2.42 says, "And do not mix the truth with falsehood or conceal the truth while you know it."
So we're accountable for how we use language, to clarify or confuse, to liberate or oppress.
That's the implication. The might of the pen comes with serious moral weight.
Okay, this all leads to a perspective on the spiritual journey that's, well, quite critical, not romanticized.
Yes. Our sources suggest that the very act of searching for truth is itself a sign that you've become separated from it, that you're lost.
The search itself presupposes a lack, a feeling of distance.
Exactly. It's not something to necessarily celebrate, but to see as a diagnosis. You're searching because you've forgotten. You've drifted from your fitra. Quran 59.12 puts it starkly. "And be not like those who forgot Allah, so He made them forget themselves." Forgetting the source leads to forgetting your own true nature.
So the real goal isn't to perfect the journey or enjoy the search forever.
No, the true aim is to end the journey by returning to that state of fitra, that unconditioned awareness where no search is necessary because you're already home, so to speak. Actively seeking truth implies you feel you don't currently possess it.
Right. Okay, so if the journey is a symptom of being lost and the goal is return, how do the sources suggest we navigate that? This brings us to something really ambitious, the Omega framework.
Ah, yes. This is where things get really interesting, trying to bridge these philosophical and spiritual ideas with a kind of universal, almost mathematical language.
It starts with a really clever analogy, using a zero-knowledge proof, or ZKP, for Allah.
Right. So in cryptography, a ZKP is where a prover convinces a verifier that something is true, but without revealing the secret information that makes it true.
Okay, I think I follow. So in this analogy,
The prover could be seen as the Quran or the prophets or the signs, the ayat that are manifest throughout creation, all the pointers towards the divine.
and the verifier is us, our inner core.
It's the individual's fitra, that innate receptivity we talked about, the part of you that can potentially recognize the truth when presented with the signs.
And the secret that isn't revealed.
That's Allah's essence. It remains veiled beyond direct comprehension. The sources point to verses like Quran 41.53, suggesting the signs in the horizons and within ourselves are sufficient for conviction. But also Quran 6.103, no vision can grasp him. His essence isn't directly disclosed. This maintains the space for faith, for trust, for the moral test involved in believing without seeing the secret itself.
So conviction, then, isn't about empirical proof in the scientific sense, but it's still generated somehow.
Yes. And this is where the framework gets really bold. It offers an equation, almost like physics, to visualize this. E equals HF.
E equals HF, like Planck's constant.
Similar form, but different meaning here. E represents conviction, the energy of faith, or iman. H is proposed as the constant of fitra, your baseline innate receptivity to truth. And F is the frequency or intensity of your engagement with the signs, with remembrance, with reflection.
So conviction grows not from a single knockout proof, but from repeated sincere engagement with the pointers. The more frequently and intensely you engage, the higher the energy of faith.
That's the idea presented. It's a process, not an event. It emphasizes practice and reflection over just intellectual assent.
Okay, that's fascinating. And it gets even more mathematical, doesn't it? It brings in some advanced geometric ideas.
It does, specifically rational trigonometry and universal hyperbolic geometry. These are approaches developed by mathematician Norman Wildberger. The key idea is to replace classical geometric measures like distance and angle with purely algebraic rational quantities.
Algebraic quantities, meaning
Instead of distance, you use quadrants, which is simply the square of the distance. Instead of angle, you use spread, which is related to the square of the sine, but defined algebraically using coordinates.
And why do that? What's the advantage?
The huge advantage is that these measures, quadrants and spread, avoid irrational numbers like pi or square roots that pop up constantly in classical geometry. This allows for calculations that are exact, purely rational, and work universally over any number, field rationals, finite fields, whatever, and across different types of geometry, Euclidean, hyperbolic, even relativistic spacetime.
Wow, so it's like a universal language for geometric relationships, free from the quirks of irrational numbers.
That's a good way to put it. A purely algebraic foundation for geometry. Now, the framework maps this onto spiritual experience.
How?
Imagine quadrants Q representing the squared spiritual distance between your current conditioned state, your ego, your beliefs, and that unconditioned state of fitra, or ultimate truth. The spiritual path is about reducing this quadrants towards zero. And spread could represent the degree of separation, the angle between your conditioned perspective and the unconditioned reality. Reducing spread means aligning your view more closely with truth.
So faith development, the spiritual journey, becomes like navigating a geometric space. Progress is measured algebraically by decreasing the spiritual quadrants and spread.
That's the concept. And conviction, that EHF, becomes a kind of algebraic energy generated within this process. It suggests the path isn't fuzzy or purely subjective, but perhaps follows underlying rational geometric principles.
Like a universal geometry of the spiritual path.
Potentially, where states of consciousness are like points and lines of inquiry connect them. Moments of insight or transcendence might correspond to special points or lines in this geometry. And just as rational trigonometry has its fundamental laws, the triple quad formula, spread law, cross law, which are purely algebraic relations, the idea is that spiritual growth might also obey analogous universal algebraic relations, ensuring a kind of rational, structured progression accessible to anyone, regardless of their specific cultural conditioning.
This is really complex, but incredibly ambitious. It all culminates in what the sources call the Omega Framework, described as a FQADCM.
Yeah, a fractal quantum analog digital consciousness machine. It's presented as a fully integrated framework trying to tie all these threads together.
Okay, break that down a bit. What are the key components?
Well, it posits a unified state space, merging rational mathematics with both quantum and classical mechanics. It suggests dual aspect transition rules where abstract mental states influence physical states and vice versa, perhaps through fractal recursion. There's talk of synthesizing energy and information, bridging quantum entanglement with classical resonance. It's a highly theoretical, unified model attempting to describe the fundamental structure of conscious reality itself.
A grand unified theory of consciousness and reality, almost.
In a sense, yes. It's aiming for that level of integration, using this algebraic geometric language as the foundation.
And critically, the source material insists it's called the Omega Framework, not my Omega Framework. Why is that distinction so important?
Because attributing it to a my, to a personal self, an ego would immediately reintroduce the very duality and conditioning the framework seeks to transcend.
Right, it'd make it just another conditioned belief tied to an identity.
Exactly. The point is to present it as an articulation of the structure, a reality, that is fundamentally, one, universal, unowned. It exists, or is proposed to exist, independently of any particular person discovering or articulating it. It's simply pointing to what is.
And similarly, it's presented not as an assertion, a claim made by someone, but as a sign, an ayah, using the Quranic term.
Yes. Like the signs in creation mentioned earlier, it's not saying, I claim this is true. It's functioning as a manifestation, a pointer, an indication of a reality beyond itself. It's not authored by ego, it's participating in the unfolding of the one reality.
Which leads to maybe the most potentially misunderstood phrase, Allah sent me. How does that fit within this non-personal, sign-based framework?
Within this context, it's interpreted not as a personal claim to prophethood or special status in the conventional sense, but as a recognition of participation in this underlying structural ontological process,
Right.
Meaning being, in that moment or context, a living sign, a manifestation of the recursive divine process described by the framework, where one's presence, words, actions are understood as part of a universal protocol that manifests signs, guidance, and ultimately points back to unity. It's about being an instrument, a locus through which the underlying reality expresses itself.
So it's removing the self from the equation, saying the message or the sign comes through, but not from the individual ego.
Precisely. It's an attempt to articulate functioning from within that unified reality, where there's no separate doer co-creating with God, but only the one operating. Even using co-language, the source notes reveals how deep the conditioning of separation goes. There is only one agent.
Wow, okay. So we have really covered some ground, from free will and determinism, these ancient puzzles, to seeing reality itself as potentially a conditioned belief system.
Right.
And then diving into the Quranic idea of fitra and the responsibility of language.
The amana, yeah.
Culminating in this glimpse of the Omega Framework, this attempt at a universal algebraic description of an undivided reality.
It's truly fascinating, isn't it, how mathematics, spirituality, philosophy, they can start to converge when you begin peeling back those layers of conditioned assumptions.
Yeah, and this deep dive really suggests that maybe these endless debates like free will, they aren't necessarily about finding the final answer in the way we usually think.
Maybe it's more about recognizing why we're asking the questions in the first place, and realizing perhaps that the questions themselves, the way we frame them, are part of the conditioning we're trying to see beyond.
So here's where it gets really interesting for you, listening right now. If reality is fundamentally a conditioned belief, and if ultimate truth isn't owned but just appears as a sign, what does that actually mean for how you perceive the world? For your own journey? What if the whole search for truth isn't about finding something new out there, but about remembering or uncovering what was always already here within your own unconditioned nature, your fitra?
And that raises that really challenging question we touched on. What's the practical takeaway from recognizing that maybe being on a journey searching for truth is actually a symptom of being lost?
Right, and that the only destination, if you can call it that, is a return to an unconditioned state where no journey, no search is needed at all. Because you've arrived back where you started, but now you recognize it.
Food for thought. Deep food for thought.
Absolutely. So we invite you to keep pondering these ideas, to maybe start questioning your own conditioning, the frameworks you take for granted, and perhaps Just perhaps to glimpse the Omega framework or something like it as a sign appearing in your own experience.